Hi, my name is Mohamed Inshaff. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect at Human Security. Today we're going to talk about the important changes in PCI DSS version 4. We're joined by Bill. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Mo. So I'm Bil Bragg. I'm CTO at Dionach. We're part of the Nomios group. I'm a PCI QSA and I've been in cybersecurity 25 years now.
What are the important changes in the PCI DSS version 4?
So there are quite a few changes in PCI DSS 4. Some of these changes are becoming mandatory in end of March 2025. I'd like to highlight 6 of the technical requirements because they obviously will take time and energy to implement. So if you haven't implemented already, it's good to know what these are. So I'll just give an overview of them. So the first one is around a new requirement for SEQA, which is the cut down self-assessment questionnaire for mostly e-commerce merchants that this applies to, who do an iframe or redirect to payment gateway. So this now requires quarterly ASV scans, so vulnerability scans by an approved scanning vendor.
Right.
There's also new criteria for SEQA around scripts, mostly related to payment pages.
Right.
So it's very important to see what that is. So the second one is on log reviews. So it's important to that any log reviews you do are now automated. So using a SIEM or a SOAR, which partner like Nomios can provide.
Right.
The third is multi-factor authentication. This is now a requirement across any access into the CDE, whether it's non-console or remote. The fourth is on application and system accounts or service accounts. These weren't referenced in PCI DSS 3 before. They're now in PCI DSS 4, and there's several requirements on those, from ensuring that you have very limited interactive logins and reviews of access rights and password expiry, which could affect quite a few entities. Then there is a fifth one. This is on internal vulnerability scanning,
Right.
which for those that it applies to, there's now a requirement for this to be authenticated. So it's important to get that started and ensure you think about false positives and iron out any issues before the deadline. And finally, there's the payment page.
Right.
Scripts. They require to have integrity checks, and there's some other requirements there. And also you need to have change in term detection monitoring from those scripts from an external point of view, from the browser view. So those, I'd say, are the sort of most of the important technical changes that I see that entities will need to put some resource into putting in place, Mo.
Great, thank you, Bill. And what about the other changes in PCI DSS version 4?
Well, yes, there's certainly some more documentation and changes around risk. So there's been a lot of talk about the customized approach, which applies to comply to many requirements as an option. And there's plenty written about that. And if you do that, there's also the targeted risk analysis as well, which is required for some of the requirements around different periods of events that you can choose the period and do a targeted risk analysis. So there's some paperwork there. And also there's inventories that are required now.
Right.
So inventories of cryptographic keys, of cipher suites, there's some requirements around end-of-life software, and also third-party software libraries that are used by software developers. And finally, I'd say another change to be aware of is the scope for PCI DSS. It needs to be formally defined and needs to be reviewed every year for merchants and every 6 months for service providers. And you can see all these changes, the ones I've talked about, and also the other new changes of PCI DSS 4 on a Dionach blog.
Great, thanks. And why do you think the organization should act now?
Well, it's important to act now because we've got some changes becoming mandatory end of March 2025.
Right.
Some of these technical requirements, they will take time to implement.
Yeah.
And also compliance should be continuous. It should be business as usual.
Yeah.
That's one of the requirements actually of PCI DSS anyway. Now, even the technical requirements, if you find a good online solution, like for example, the payment page monitoring solution like Human Security is a good solution. but still you need to implement that. It takes time, doesn't it? And also there's the risks. You know, a lot of the new changes to PCI DSS 4 is following the changes in risk to the payment card ecosystem. So it is important to put those changes in even before the deadline. And so now you may be meeting some of those requirements, but if you have a gap assessment done to the change of PCI DSS 4, then you can have those any gaps identified and any actions you need to take before the deadline. So that's why.
Great, thanks, Bill. And what if an organization don't do anything and don't act on it?
Well, that could be a problem because you may have a gap in compliance. So if you wait until your next annual assessment, whether that be self-assessment or report on compliance, then you may come across some requirements that you're not compliant to. Therefore, especially for technical changes that may take some time, there may be months when you're not compliant from your gap, and then you have a gap from your last AOC to your next time you're compliant. And also there's the risk. I mean, there might be more risk of a breach because you haven't put in these sort of just good practice things. I mean, MFA is now recognized as just normal practice to have MFA everywhere. And also internal vulnerability scans that are authenticated is standard practice these days. And also monitoring web pages like payment pages is also very good practice.
Great. And what changes may organizations have missed?
Well, Mo, there's one thing that I think a lot of entities may not have picked up on is the code repository requirement now. Section 6 of PCI DSS says that code repositories that may store application code that may be used in the CDE or configuration information, for example, infrastructure as code, is now in scope for PCI DSS assessments. So it's important to review that if you are using code in your CDE, or if you're, which is pretty typical, a lot of organizations now using things like Terraform in code repositories, that you review that and understand how this affects your scope for your PCI DSS compliance.
So what do you think organizations should do now?
Well, I think if they haven't already, they need to get a gap assessment against the changes in PCI DSS 4. So Dionach have been doing this, helping companies with this for a while now. And that will give you some clear actions and recommendations from identifying the gaps on how you can put those changes in. And where there may be some effective solutions out there, like for payment page scripts or SIEM or SOAR, we have some great partners like Human Security and obviously Nomios provide managed services in these spaces as well. So that's what I'd recommend.
Great. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Mo. It's been a pleasure. And if anyone wants to find out more, they can just scan the QR code.